All right, it's day 19 in the 30-day Bible reading plan. And yesterday we looked at the birth story in Luke. Now I want to show you John's gospel. John 1, his prologue, John 1, 1 through 18, is one of the richest theological reflections on the incarnation of God that we see in Scripture. Incarnation, by the way, is a combination of two Latin words, in, meaning in, of course, and carne, which means flesh. So literally what we have is in the flesh. You can think of a carnivore, by the way. That's a flesh eater, a meat eater. So incarnation, that's what's going on here. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word is been debated about what this means, but what it appears in its simplest terms is the Word is God's communicative act, or God's means of communication with creation. It is that which underlies everything about how God interacts with the world. But this is not separate from God. The Word was with God. This implies a very close relationship. But more than that, the Word was God. And by the way, this is where people really get into some debates. So both the Church of the Latter-day Saints, we call them Mormons, or Jehovah's Witnesses, do not like this passage because they don't want Jesus to be equal with the Father, which is the Orthodox confession from the beginning, by the way. So Jehovah's Witnesses insert the word was a God, and they say it's grammatically, there's a grammatical reason because there's no definite article here in Greek, and they're right about that, but that's not how Greek works. And they only follow their own rule 6% of the time when it comes to definite articles. So they're really doing it because of their own bias. And then the Joseph Smith translation, which does in Mormon theology supersede any other translation of Scripture, changes this and just totally confuses it. I've got a video on that. If you go to Monument Heights Baptist Church on YouTube and look up the gospel study on John, I go into some detail on that. He was in the beginning with God. By the way, these in the beginnings take us back to a familiar passage. You may recall Genesis 1:1. In the beginning was, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. So we're connected to in the very beginning. And by the way, he's not created. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. So he cannot be a created being. He is in the beginning. He is eternal with the Father. In him was life, and life's a huge theme in John, by the way. And life was the light of men. Light is also another one. These life and death, light and darkness. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Then we're going to be introduced to John the Baptizer. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to bear witness about the light, so that all might believe through him. By the way, this is the Gospel of John's purpose statement. You can find it at the very end, 21. I can't think of the verse, but chapter 21. I've written these things so that you might believe. He was not the light, but came to bear witness about the light. The true light, which gives light to everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, yet the world did not know him. And this is another one of John's themes. He came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. So we see this constant rejection in the first 12 chapters of John as Jesus performs miracle after miracle, and they still reject him. But to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. And so we see this contrast between those who believe and those who don't, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. So you think John 3 here, right? You know John 3:16 probably, for this is the way God loved the world. He sent his only son into the world. But the whole discourse in John 3 is about being born again and how God does this supernatural act. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. I love this word, dwelt. It's literally the verb form tabernacle. So the Word became flesh and tabernacled among us. If you want to hear more about that, you can also check out that video I mentioned earlier. I'll try to put a link to it in the notes below. So check that out in the description on this video. And we have seen his glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. So we've seen the glory of God, and it's a unique glory. By the way, this only is that word that is in John 3:16, monogenes, which is sometimes translated only begotten, but more recent Greek research has shown us that what this really has in mind is the unique status as son, that this is a one-of-a-kind son, that this isn't some sort of only child in the sense of being birthed. He's not birthed, but he's unique, and that is, he's the only one who has this role. John bore witness about him and cried, "This was he of whom I said, he who comes after me ranks before me, because he was before me." Here's this pretty bold statement. John is born first, but John is saying that the Word, who is Jesus Christ, is eternal, and so he goes before him. And by the way, we see this again in John 8, when Jesus says, "Before Abraham was, I am," and they pick up stones to throw at him because he's claiming to be the eternal God. "For from his fullness we have all received grace upon grace." So it's been piled up. "For the law was given through Moses, but grace and truth came through Jesus Christ." So we have this law, and the law is a good thing. It's not a bad thing, but it doesn't tend to lead to grace. Now, and then here's the final statement in the prologue. "No one has ever seen God." Okay, that's true, right? "But the only God," and here Jesus is identified as only God. There is dispute here. Some of the early manuscripts read the Son, and so you can see a footnote here in the ESV to tell you that. But God makes sense. It's the more difficult reading, and it's more likely that someone who's trying to clean things up would go with an easier reading, so they would change it from God to Son. That seems more likely in this case, and that's the reason the ESV is chosen to read with many ancient manuscripts here on God. Also, I have a video on my channel about that issue of how that works, New Testament textual criticism, if you're really interested in that. "No one has ever seen God, the only God, who is at the Father's side. He has made him known." So how do we know what God is like? Well, through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, but Christ has revealed him perfectly, because Christ is more than a man. He is God in the flesh. "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." See you tomorrow for day 20 in the 30-day Bible reading plan.